The evidence is clear. Countries that rely heavily on markets and maintain clearly defined private property rights tend to be economically prosperous. In these countries, individuals have incentives to invest in themselves and what they own to increase productivity and future earnings. They have incentives to use what they own and their time where they are most productive. They have incentives to produce and consume goods when the value is greater than the cost, and to avoid doing so when the cost is greater than the value. They are confident they can keep what they produce or earn because they are protected from theft, coercion, and corruption. Ronald Reagan said, "It is a fact of nature. It is another fact of human nature. When a person owns assets, a house, land, or a small business, or shares of a stock in a large one, he or she will look after those assets." So what's the evidence? A substantial body of evidence indicates that the market system tends to lead to economic prosperity. Here's an example or a visual illustration of the effect of market systems on investment and productivity. It's a heat map of photosynthetic activity. The Midwest United States, where we grow corn and wheat, is one of the most photosynthetic active areas in the world. And the reason is farmers have invested in irrigation and fertilization and planting techniques to maximize the growth of their crops in that area, because by growing more crops, they can sell more crops and earn more profit. Some other evidence. The village in China that signed a pact privatizing their land became a model of productivity in China. Colonists in Jamestown began to thrive only after they divided the land and each person could do what he wanted with his land. South Korea has more electrical consumption than North Korea. Colonists in New England began to thrive only after they abandoned communal living. We mentioned earlier the Midwest photosynthetic activity. Farmers there have the incentive to irrigate, fertilize, conserve soil, rotate crops, and plant efficiently to make the land productive. Milton Friedman says that the only examples in recorded history where individuals have escaped from grinding poverty are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. Statistical evidence, statistical analysis shows that countries with high indices of economic freedom tend to have high standards of living, and countries with low indices of economic freedom tend to have low standards of living. Simple example, I pulled up the 10 countries with the highest indices and the 10 countries with the lowest indices. I'll list them here in the notes. The average in the top 10 is 37. The average GDP per capita in the top 10 is 37,837. The 10 most economically free countries have average GDP per capita of 37,837. The 10 countries with the lowest levels of economic freedom have a GDP per capita of only 7,380. Here's a chart. I've got the 10 with the highest levels of economic freedom over to the right, countries with the 10 lowest economic freedom to the left, GDP is measured on the vertical axis. You can see that the 10 freest tend to have higher GDPs than the 10 countries that are the least free economically, at least as measured by the Heritage Foundation. The trends are more distinct when we look at perceived corruption. I'm going to jump to the chart. Here are the 10 countries that have the least perceived corruption according to transparency.com. Here are the 10 countries that have the most perceived corruption according to transparency.com. The average of the top 10, the GDP per capita of the top 10 is $42,096. The GDP per capita of the bottom 10 is only $3,719. You can see that the least corrupt countries have much higher GDP per capita than the most corrupt countries. I give you some data if you want to look at it more closely, but I don't care about that right now. The next thing you should do is walk through the check your understanding questions and then compare your answers with the screencast.